Hey, so Toyota has brought back the FJ Cruiser nameplate with a new compact model that sits in between the Corolla Cross and RAV4 in size. So let's have a look now at some of the key specs and details of the new vehicle. So the FJ nameplate, it harks back to the original Land Cruiser models, specifically the Land Cruiser FJ40, and it was last used on the FJ Cruiser from the early to mid 2000s. But this new model is a bit smaller in size and probably is a little bit more mainstream in terms of how it's positioned. And given the current landscape with a bunch of different vehicles, such as the Land Rover Defender, the Bronco, got the Ford Everest, Pajero Sport, a number of different models that are bringing back that rugged, in between size model. So we're seeing now with the return of the popularity of these kind of models, Toyota really wants to cash in. So currently, it's being targeted towards Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, and a few other emerging markets. Surprisingly, no plans for Europe, the US, or even Australia, but I do imagine it would do quite well, at least in Australia, which has had an appetite for Land Cruiser Prado and the full blown Land Cruiser 300 model as well. So I think it's only a matter of time where before it does come to some of these markets as well. It's going to have a powertrain that's shared with the Hilux and the Fortuner. It's a 120 kilowatt powertrain with 246 newton meters of torque, which isn't the most powerful or gutsy powertrain that Toyota have got, which is probably why they haven't released it in a couple of other markets yet. You'd expect them to have a higher output model, potentially a six-cylinder model or even a hybrid that has a little bit more poke before it gets adopted in these other countries. It has a six-speed automatic transmission and part-time four-wheel drive as well, and a lower on-frame platform. So we talked about who it might compete with in terms of the Pajero Sport, Everest, Defender 90 as well. Potentially could compete with the Suzuki Jimny, which has been much loved by people in a category that's a little bit smaller in size, and also the Dacia Duster as well. But it's not as quite as small as those models. It sits in between, probably as a compact to medium SUV. Also, similar to the new Land Cruiser Prado, there's a couple of different front end options. So you've got a round classic design, which harks back to the initial Land Cruiser models. And also, you've got a C shaped DRL's rectangular headlight, which is quite nice too. And another feature that it's got is has removable front and rear bumpers, allows it to have easier and cheaper repairs if there's any off-road damage too. And it also has modular lightweight load carrying equipment, or MOLE panels, MOLE panels if you want. So for attaching different equipment. So there's some photos as well where it's got a snorkel attachment as an example of what can be added to this vehicle. So we'll see the full debut in the Japanese Mobility Show at the end of the month, but judging by the initial specs and the initial release of photos, it looks like it's going to be quite a popular model for Toyota. Okay, let's have a look now at the exterior design of the car. So we can see here the family resemblance with the other SUV or off-road SUV models in the Toyota range. So from the Land Cruiser 300, we've got here on the left, doesn't have as much of a resemblance, but you can see in the profile here, there's some similarities to the front end does actually look quite different. Then we got the old 70 series, which has been facelifted a number of different times. It actually doesn't look too bad, especially now with the retro motif that the new Prado has here. I think the Prado and the new FJ probably the most similar in terms of design. It's definitely a very similar front end, although you'd have to say that the new C-shaped headlights added a little bit more of a modern feel to the new model. And it's got the old school Toyota logo as well, which all three of these vehicles have. And on the 300, they use it on the GR Sport model as well. If we look into a little bit more detail now into that front end design, so really clean framing at the top here, and you've got the fog lamps integrated into the front bumper, and a pretty clean, simple lower air intake too. Very upright, very retro, which is what this market wants, and similar to the Defender, the Jimny, those kind of models where it has a really tough ready to off-road look. And then if we move on to the rear here, it's got an interesting design in terms of the tail lamps here. So again, they've got that C-shaped LED signature going in the back as well, but it's not actually connected to the tailgate. I think this tailgate swings open, so it has to be a separate piece here. So it's mounted, these taillights are mounted on the left separately. And then you've got an all blacked out panel here. And then of course you've got to have the rear tire on the back if you're serious about off-roading. So it's a nice, simple but tough and resolved design that you've got on the front and rear. Very clean side profile too. You've got very thick wheel arches and off-road ready tires too. So here you've got a nice blue finish, and now you've got a more sandstone type finish, which is more of a heritage color in the Land Cruiser lineup. So overall, I think they've done a pretty good job here. If we compare it to some of its predecessors, you've got the first Land Cruiser model, or one of the first Land Cruiser models, where it's clear where the design has been inspired from. Obviously, it's a more modern take on it, but you've got that very boxy design, very simple framing in the front end too, and you've got that rear tire on the back. Then you've got the last FJ Cruiser, which was a bigger model and perhaps slightly different position, more of a lifestyle vehicle in some way. I think it still had off-road capability, but you saw a lot in the city as well, in the CBD, which I have no doubt you'll see the new FJ, at least in the markets it's released, being used in that way too. But I think this was more of a style icon, and I do think this looked a little bit nicer compared to the new model. Not that the new model looks bad at all, but I think it was very well resolved and ahead of its time when it was revealed. And if I recall correctly, almost identical to the concept model. So very timeless design, the old FJ Cruiser. And I think if they release this again, just with some updated graphics, new LED headlamps and tail lamps, you could really sell this again, just revamp the interior. So this is a great design. And then finally, you've got the concept that this was inspired by, and very similar again in design. It is surprising that the new model didn't come with any electrification, potentially that we might see those powertrains down the line as well. If not fully electric, we might see a hybrid powertrain as well. So I think that'll be a nice option and add much needed power to the powertrain of the new model here. If we move on to the interior now, it's quite Spartan but practical, which is what you want really. You don't want too many fancy features or too many distractions in a car like this that's made for a ready-made purpose to go off-road. You want durable materials, which they've got here. So you're not going to see too many soft touch materials, I imagine, but you'll see some nice use of durable materials that are going to last the test of time. And it's a very similar interior to the Land Cruiser Prado here. You've got that big screen here, which I think has the new infotainment system that debuted on the upcoming RAV4. You've still got physical controls, climate control units down here, and a very chunky, practical steering wheel with physical controls, as well as a driver's display as well. And then you've got your off-road modes detailed here. In terms of rear legroom, it is a smaller vehicle. It is only a little bit longer than a Corolla Cross, so I don't imagine it to be super roomy at the back, but there's still enough legroom here. And I think if you compare it to something like a Suzuki Jimny, I think you're going to get a bit more practicality out of this too. I'd like to see a little more color used here. Potentially they could bring the exterior color and pipe some of that into the interior of this car. I believe the old FJ Cruiser used some of those elements, which they could have brought back. It is quite dark and dingy in here. Maybe there's some other seat options as well that could brighten it up. I would like to see some more color brightness, but in terms of the purpose it was made for, I don't see maybe too many concerns from its prospective customer base here. So that's the new Land Cruiser FJ. Disappointing that it hasn't been announced for Europe, Australia, and the US just yet, but I think if there were some additional powertrains announced and they do a little bit more customization for those markets, I expect this to be a hot seller for the brand.